she's staring at.
Originally a Nintendo Family Computer Disk System released before being turned into a Nintendo Entertainment System game pack in 1987, and packaged in a spiffy silver box so you know this some good shit, son. Kid Icarus placed you in control of Pit, an angel hero who must endure some harsh training in order to claim the 3 sacred treasures and use them to rid Angel Land of the evil demon known as Medusa. He does this by playing through 12 areas of fighting monsters and collecting hearts for the purposes of purchasing items that will aid Pit in his training. What, you thought Simon's Quest was the only game that used hearts for currency? You stupid person, you. Get the fuck out of here. Fun fact, Kid Icarus was the second ever Nintendo game that I have ever played in my existence on this mortal soil. Remembered seeing the game for the first time as a kid, and being wowed by the game's innovative ability to scroll upwards. I mean, holy balls, what mad sorcery was this? Of course, I saw something similar in some scrolling shooters on the Atari, but that's besides the point. Less impressive was this game's less than stellar ability to turn the bottom of the screen into a perpetual bottomless pit. And yeah, that was truly the pits. Yeah, but I digress. So Pit starts his adventure off with limited skills, only a sliver of health that eats away quickly if you're not careful, and a bow and arrow whose shots cover an extremely limited range. As such, expect to die often until you're able to upgrade your fighting prowess. Score enough points before the end of a level, and you eventually can extend your life meter to a maximum of 5 square units. Perform well enough, and you'll eventually come across this dude who will increase the power of your shots as well as change Pit's colors, which is always a telling sign of increased power in the magical world of Nintendo. Survive the endurance rounds, and you could choose one of 3 sacred weapons. The sacred bow, which extends your range, a more powerful flaming arrow with its fireball thing, or a crystal rod which surrounds Pit with a destructive shield to protect against foes. These weapons are inactive at first and only enable when you hit a certain amount of health, so it'll be a while before you're able to use these, but once enabled, they're yours forever. Until these little fuckers come along and steal your gear that you'll have to buy back from the black market. Oh, you could barter if you know the secret, but I'd rather not. I'd just rather have these fuckers stay the fuck off and die. But they can't die, but fuck them. Kid Icarus is a platformer of sorts that has 3 styles of play. The majority of the game's 13 stages comprise the scrolling bits, most of which have you climbing upwards with wraparound sides, basically move off the left side to reappear on the right, while the second world has you moving to the right in a traditional side-scrolling format. In any case, you'll be fighting off enemies for hearts and points, as well as entering doors that will comprise either shops to purchase wares, bonus games where hitting the pots in the correct order nets you a prize, trap rooms where you'll be ambushed by monsters, healing pools to restore your health, the aforementioned endurance rounds in empty rooms, which are empty unless you're skilled enough to earn an upgrade to your attack power. Oh, and try to avoid being spotted by the Reaper or else it'll go crazy and summon its minions to pursue you, while an annoying tune plays in the background, the same annoying tune that plays if you shoot a pot with the god of poverty residing within it. Yep. So these are typically straightforward, get to the end of the level type things, nothing out of the ordinary. And whenever you die or resume a game via password, or sacred words as the game calls it, you restart the beginning of the stage with 2 square units of health, filled if you have 2 square units that is, and whatever gear you entered the stage with initially. Now after clearing each world's 3 scrolling stages, you'll enter that world's 4th and final stage, a dungeon broken up into single screen rooms that you'll have to navigate your way around in order to reach that world's boss. These stages include unique tools such as a map, a pencil to mark your trail, and a torch to highlight your current position. These aren't required to clear the stage, but they would help, or you could just look up a map online because that's what everyone else is doing these days with these sorts of games anyway. Dungeons have their own perils. Trap rooms, bladed hazards, dead ends, and of course the dreaded eggplant wizard. A somewhat clueless henchman in the old Captain N cartoon that nobody remembers, but an absolute motherfucker whose one attack can turn you into an eggplant, rendering you defenseless until you can find a nurse to cure your ill. Not a fun time around this guy, especially if you're coming in from the top and you're already planted before you even have a chance to breathe. Dungeons are also where you'll find stone warriors that can be freed with mallets, which you can attain by grabbing this heart during the scrolling stages that will play a ticking sound that will turn monsters into collectible mallets for a period of time. Or you could purchase said mallets from a shop, either way works. When freed, the warriors will join you in battle against the dungeon boss, where they will fire a couple of shots before getting promptly killed off fairly quickly. Which makes you wonder if maybe they were better off as frozen statues forever and ever. Nobody's going to care either way. Once Pit acquires all 3 sacred treasures, he'll equip them and tackle the final stage of the game, which is basically a scrolling shooter type of thing where you fight and kill foes until you eventually reach the Medusa, dodge her snake thing, block her waves with your shield, kill her eyeball, and save Angel Land from her evil face thing, and enjoy one of the game's many endings, because this is one of those games. Sit through the end credits and restart at the first stage with all your stats and gear retained so you can endure the whole experience all over again. What fun. Kid Icarus is often considered one of the Nintendo favorites, perhaps even a classic title in the NES library, and on the surface you've got a good foundation. Typical platforming fare with some mild adventuring and role-playing elements tossed in for good measure, which makes sense for this sort of game. Controlling Pit is a breeze for the most part. He could shoot left, right, and also straight up, similar to another silver-boxed Nintendo icon from the day. And when he's crouching, he could also do the duck slide. I'm not going there. Ducking on certain platforms will cause you to fall through them, which might seem like a neat idea on paper, but not in a game where you're mainly moving upwards, and an ever-present abyss looms beneath at every turn. Control is generally responsive for the most part, although it's worth noting that Pit has a bit of a slippery step before stopping, which makes precise platforming a bit of a hassle, especially on narrow spots, but other than that, it's still somewhat manageable and entirely playable. That having been said, Kid Icarus is not what I would call an immediately approachable game, primarily due to the rather steep difficulty curve. Your starting stats are pathetically weak at first, and it takes a good long while before you're able to build yourself up to a point where you can reasonably hold your own. This means having to grind in some places so you can nab enough hearts to purchase some important power-ups, whether it be healing items that save you from death, or feathers that will grant you limited flight if you fall into a pit, no pun intended, or score enough points so you can earn that life upgrade at the end of a stage, or rack up invisible skill points to earn the all-important shot upgrade, which increases the damage you can inflict, which is especially important in the boss battles where it takes numerous hits to down a boss. And these boss battles are often the worst aspect of Kid Icarus, as they tend to bounce around and they have some annoying traits. Killing one doesn't feel like an accomplishment, you're just glad it's over and done with so you can move on to the next thing. There's a lot of little quirks you have to adjust to in order to endure Kid Icarus. Dropping through certain platforms via crouching, wrap around sides for the vertical levels, entering and exiting rooms will clear out any enemies on screen, which is nice, but this would also clear out any pickups such as life-restoring chalices, which is not so nice. On the flip side, enemies are usually reskins of specific types depending on the world you're venturing through, so while you'll encounter new foes, they're basically following the same pattern as previously encountered foes. Likewise, dungeons will reuse room layouts constantly in typical Nintendo fashion, so you'll eventually gain some familiarity with your surroundings, which won't help much if you enter a room and the first thing to greet you is an errant eggplant. Even the final horizontal scrolling level isn't all that straightforward, as you have to kill a set number of enemies before you're even allowed to face off against Medusa, otherwise you just loop back to the beginning of the level. Apparently this set amount is depending on your overall progression, so it'll either be a walk in the park or a total sloth, but once you reach Medusa, well... By 1987, people started getting the hang of making nice-looking visual elements on the NES, and Kid Icarus wasn't quite there yet, but for what it's worth, there's quite a bit of detail in the little things. The character sprites are quite impeccable, there's quite a bit of variety in the enemy design. I always like the little manic dance Death does whenever you're spotted. The level design might seem a bit chaotic or thrown together at times, and there's not much in the way of background elements, maybe a couple clouds at most, but it all comes together to form a visually pleasing enough world for you to venture through, though the dungeons remain a dull sight, though I suppose that's the point. And then there's the final stage, which seems like it came from a totally different game. Endless clouds in the bottom, pillars, stars, platforms in the distance, lots of background elements. Not the most eye-dropping thing. It's still largely simplistic as a whole, but hey, they saved the nice looking level for last, and also the different ending animations are a bit something to admire. Sound is fairly above average fare. Like many early Nintendo classics, Kid Icarus boasts one of the more memorable soundtracks of the era, and the tunes themselves are, well, they're fine. You've got the melodic opening theme, which sounds better on the simpler NES instrumentation than the scratchy, ear-grinding disc system version. And then there's the first level tune that's also quite memorable since it's the first level tune, and of course it is. But then you've got everything else, and while some of the tunes lean hard into high pitches and annoying jingles, they're largely fine. Sound effects are simple, somewhat blandish, and the sound Pit makes whenever he takes a hit is soul-crushing, but it's not terrible, it's fine. It's simple, typical NES fare. On the disc system, there's some sampled sounds here and there. The less said, the better, and that's the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned. Overall, Kid Icarus is a perfectly fine platforming adventure with some role-playing elements and some character building tossed in for good measure. Certainly a title worthy of its somewhat legendary or at least highly regarded status, though it is not a game for everyone. It takes a little while before you can get a good groove going, but once you do, that's when the game really starts to shine. And if you're willing to put in the time, there is a good time to be had with Kid Icarus. It's seen a number of re-releases over the years. It's on the Switch Online NES gimmick thing, and there's even a couple follow-ups on the Game Boy and 3DS, I believe. But the NES original holds its own just fine, and is a game well worth checking out if you can.